Once upon a time, in a kingdom so picturesque it looked like it was ripped straight out of a travel brochure, there lived a girl named Cinderella. Now, don't let the name fool you. She wasn't always covered in cinders, nor was she perpetually moping around a fireplace. No, our Cindy was a bright, sarcastic, and slightly chaotic young woman who just happened to be stuck in the world's worst family dynamic. This is her story, complete with snarky asides, absurd obstacles, and a surprising amount of glitter. Cinderella, or Cindy as she preferred, lived in a sprawling, creaky mansion on the edge of the kingdom. The house was grand but falling apart, much like her stepfamily's sense of decency. Her father, a kind but overly trusting merchant, had remarried after Cindy's mother passed away. Enter Lady Tremaine, a woman whose face suggested she'd just bitten into a lemon and whose personality was about as warm as a tax audit. Lady Tremaine brought along her two daughters, Anastasia and Drizella, who were less stepsisters and more human equivalents of a bad Yelp review. Cindy's dad wasn't around much, always off on some ill-fated business venture involving exotic spices or novelty socks. So Lady Tremaine ruled the roost, and she made it her mission to turn Cindy into the household's unofficial maid. Cinderella, she'd sneer, "The floors won't scrub themselves, and neither will my ego." Cindy, being the good-natured, slightly passive-aggressive soul she was, complied, but not without muttering under her breath about how she'd rather clean a dragon-esque lair than deal with her stepfamily-esque laundry. The mansion was a circus of chaos. Anastasia, the elder stepsister, had a laugh. Like a hyena with a head cold and an obsession with collecting porcelain figurines of questionable taste, think cats in top hats and frogs playing banjos. Drizella, the younger, was convinced she was destined to be a world-famous singer, despite having a voice that could curdle milk from 3 kingdoms away. Their hobbies included bickering, eating Cindy's secret stash of cookies, and leaving their dirty socks everywhere but the laundry basket. Cindy's only allies were the household animals, a sassy cat named Lucifer who, despite his devilish name, was more of a grumpy food critic than a villain, a pack of mice who fancied themselves amateur interior decorators, and a dog named Bruno who was so lazy he once slept through a thunderstorm. The mice, led by a particularly chatty one named Yes, had taken it upon themselves to reorganize Cindy's chores by hiding her mop or stealing her scrubbing brushes, thinking they were helping. "We're streamlining your workflow," Gus squeaked as Cindy fished her broom out of a flour sack. Despite the chaos, Cindy kept her spirits up by daydreaming. She'd imagine herself running a bakery, opening a comedy club, or maybe just escaping to a tropical island where nobody asked her to iron their petticoats. Her optimism was her superpower, though she often wondered if it was also her curse. "If I'm so cheerful," she'd mutter while scrubbing the hearth, "why do I keep ending up with the short end of the stick?" One sunny morning, as Cindy was wrestling with a particularly stubborn stain that looked suspiciously like Anastasia's attempt at artistic jam smearing, a trumpet blared outside. The entire household froze except Lucifer, who yawned and went back to napping on a velvet cushion. A royal messenger, decked out in a uniform so shiny it could blind a bat, strutted into the courtyard, unrolled a scroll, and announced in a voice that could wake a coma patient, "Hear ye, hear ye. His Royal Highness, Prince Charming, yes, that's his actual name, Don't Laugh, invites all eligible maidens to a grand ball at the palace. His Majesty seeks a bride, or at least someone who can tolerate his obsession with vintage chess sets. Attendance is mandatory, unless you're a goat, in which case, please stay home." The mansion erupted into pandemonium. Anastasia shrieked, knocking over her collection of porcelain frogs, which shattered in a cacophony of tiny banjo-playing tragedies. Drizella began practicing her singing, which sounded like a duet between a foghorn and a distressed goose. Lady Tremaine's eyes gleamed with the kind of ambition that could make a shark jealous. "My daughters," she declared, "will dazzle the prince, and one of them will be queen. Cinderella, you'll make their gowns." Cindy, elbow-deep in soap suds, raised an eyebrow. "Oh, joy. I get to play seamstress for the stepsister fashion disaster show. Can I at least charge for overtime?" "No," snapped Lady Tremaine, "but you can scrub the chimney while you're at it." The ball was the talk of the kingdom, and Cindy couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement. Sure, she wasn't the exactly eligible maiden material. Her wardrobe consisted of hand-me-downs and a single apron that had seen better days, but the idea of dancing, eating fancy food, and maybe sneaking a peek at the prince's chess collection was tempting. Plus, she'd heard the palace had an all-you-can-eat dessert buffet, and Cindy was not one to say no to. The days leading up to the ball were a blur of fabric, needles, and stepsister tantrums. Anastasia demanded a gown the color of envy, which Cindy interpreted as lime green, only for Anastasia to wail, "I look like a pickled cucumber." Drizella insisted on a dress with so many ruffles it could double as a parachute. Cindy, ever the trooper, stitched away, sneaking in a few sarcastic flourishes like a hidden pocket for snacks in Anastasia's dress and a detachable cape for Drizella's, just in case she wanted to make a dramatic exit or escape a bad note. Meanwhile, Cindy secretly worked on her own dress. Hidden in the attic, she pieced together scraps of silk, lace, and a bit of sparkly thread she'd borrowed from Lady Tremaine's sewing kit. The mice helped, or at least they thought they did, by adding beads and buttons that made the dress look like a disco ball had a love child with a doily. "It's avant-garde," Gus proclaimed, as Cindy stared at the chaotic masterpiece. "It's a wardrobe malfunction waiting to happen," she replied, but she loved it anyway. It was hers, and it was proof she could create something beautiful out of nothing. On the night of the ball, Cindy revealed her dress to her stepfamily, hoping for a shred of approval. Instead, Anastasia cackled, "You look like a peacock with a budget cut." Drizella, not to be outdone, grabbed a pair of scissors and accidentally snipped a sleeve, while Lady Tremaine declared, "You're not going to the ball, Cinderella. Someone has to stay home and guard the cheese from those wretched mice." Cindy's heart sank, but she didn't argue. She watched as her stepfamily piled into a carriage that looked like it was one pothole away from collapsing and trundled off to the palace. Alone in the silent mansion, she sat on the front steps, her ruined dress in her lap, and muttered, "Well, at least I've got Lucifer for company. He's got better manners than those three." Just as Cindy was contemplating running away to join a traveling circus, a puff of glitter exploded in the garden, accompanied by a cough and a distinctly exasperated, "Oh, blast! I always overdo the sparkles." Out of the glitter cloud stepped a woman who looked like she'd raided a costume shop's clearance bin. She wore a mismatched robe of purple and pink, a pointy hat that kept slipping over one eye, and glasses so thick they could probably see into next week. This was Cindy's fairy godmother, and she was clearly having an off day. "Who are you?" Cindy asked, wiping glitter out of her eyes. "Your fairy godmother, obviously," the woman huffed. "Call me Fizz. I'm here to get you to that ball, because apparently the universe thinks you need a night off. Also, I drew the short straw at the fairy union meeting." Cindy blinked. "You're going to magic me to the ball, with what? A wand and a dream." Fizz brandished a wand that looked suspiciously like a repurposed knitting needle. "This, my dear, is a top-of-the-line magical implement. Well, it's from the discount bin, but it works, mostly. Now, let's get you a dress, a ride, and some shoes that don't scream I clean fireplaces for a living." With a wave of her wand, Fizz transformed Cindy's tattered dress into a gown so dazzling it could have starred in its own Broadway show. It was blue, sparkly, and had just the right amount of poof to make Cindy feel like a princess, but not a parade float. The mice, who'd been watching from the sidelines, squeaked in approval, though Gus muttered something about needing more sequins. Next, Fizz turned a pumpkin from the garden into a carriage, which was a less elegant coach and more giant orange roller skate with questionable suspension. She transformed the mice into horses, who immediately started arguing about who got to lead the team. Bruno became a coachman, though he mostly just napped in the driver's seat, and Lucifer was turned into a footman, which he took as a personal insult. "I'm a cat, not a butler," he yelled, but Fizz ignored him. Finally, Fizz conjured a pair of glass slippers. "Glass?" Cindy asked, skeptical. "Isn't that a lawsuit waiting to happen?" They're magically reinforced. Fizz assured her. Tougher than steel, lighter than air, and they make your feet look fabulous. But here's the catch. The magic wears off at midnight. Budget cuts, you know? Fairy Union's been stingy with the pixie dust. Cindy, now looking like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, climbed into the pumpkin carriage, which wobbled alarmingly. "If I dye Pandora's box, I'm ready," she said, and off she went to the ball. With the mice horses bickering the whole way, the palace was a glittering spectacle of chandeliers, tapestries, and people trying way too hard to impress each other. Cindy slipped in unnoticed, mostly because everyone was too busy staring at Anastasia's neon green dress or flinching at Drizella's attempt to sing a love ballad to a passing waiter. The prince, whose real name was Charles, but who was stuck with charming because of a royal branding campaign, stood at the edge of the ballroom, looking bored. He was handsome, sure, with wavy hair and a jawline that could cut glass, but he had the social skills of a particularly shy rock. Cindy caught his eye. Not because of her stunning gown, though it helped, but because she tripped over a rug and accidentally launched a tray of appetizers into the air, catching them with the grace of a juggler. "Nice save," Charles said, offering her a hand. "Most people just let the shrimp fly." "Thanks," Cindy replied, brushing a prawn off her shoulder. "I'm used to cleaning up messes." They danced, and it was less fairytale romance and more two people trying not to step on each other's toes. Charles was charmingly awkward, confessing that he hated balls and would rather be playing chess with his valet. Cindy, delighted by his lack of pretension, told him about her stepfamily's antics, making him laugh so hard he snorted champagne. "You're not like the others," he said. "They all want my crown. You seem like you'd rather steal the dessert table." "Guilty," Cindy grinned. "But I'd share." As the night wore on, they danced, talked, and discovered a shared love of terrible puns. Cindy forgot all about the midnight deadline until the clock began to chime. "Oh, no," she gasped, realizing her magical makeover was about to expire. She bolted, leaving a bewildered Charles holding one of her glass slippers, which had fallen off in her haste. "Wait." He called, but she was already halfway down the palace steps, her carriage turning back into a pumpkin with a loud pop. Back at the mansion, Cindy was back in her rags, surrounded by her animal friends, who were all talking over each other about how epic the ball had been. You should have seen the prince's face. Gus squeaked. He was smitten. Lucifer rolled his eyes. Smitten, bitten, who cares? She lost a shoe. Amateur move. Cindy was heartbroken but pragmatic. "At least I got to dance and eat cake, and I've got one slipper left. Maybe I'll start a trend." But deep down, she couldn't stop thinking about Charles' goofy smile and the way he laughed at her joke about the king's toupee. Meanwhile, Charles was on a mission. He declared that he'd marry the girl whose foot fit the glass slipper, mostly because he didn't know her name and had no other leads. The kingdom was abuzz with gossip as he and his valet, a no-nonsense fellow named Jenkins, traveled from house to house, trying the slipper on every maiden. The process was a comedy of errors. One girl got her foot stuck in the slipper, another tried to bribe Jenkins with a chicken, and a third claimed the slipper was her emotional support shoe. When they reached Cindy's mansion, Lady Tremaine locked her in the attic, determined to keep her away from the prince. Anastasia and Drizella took turns trying to cram their feet into the slipper, with Anastasia's toes curling like frightened caterpillars and Drizella's heels sticking out like a defiant mountain. Charles, growing increasingly desperate, noticed the mice scurrying toward the attic and followed them. With the help of Bruno, who finally woke up, and Lucifer, who grudgingly tripped Lady Tremaine, Cindy escaped the attic just in time. She slid her foot into the slipper, which fit perfectly, and Charles's face lit up like a chandelier. "It's you," he exclaimed, "the appetizer juggler." "Guilty," Cindy said, blushing. The wedding was a kingdom-wide spectacle, complete with a cake so tall it needed its own scaffolding. Cindy's stepfamily was invited, mostly because she felt sorry for them. Anastasia brought her least offensive porcelain cat as a gift, and Drizella sang at the reception, causing several guests to flee in terror. Fizz, the fairy godmother, showed up late, covered in glitter and claiming she'd been stuck in traffic behind a flock of enchanted geese. Cindy and Charles settled into palace life, where she opened a bakery and he taught her how to play chess badly. They bickered affectionately, laughed constantly, and never took themselves too seriously. The mice became palace decorators, turning the throne room into a questionable mix of plaid and polka dots. Lucifer was promoted to chief nap officer, and Bruno slept through most of the royal events. Cinderella's tale is more than a rags to riches romance. It asks a story about resilience, how Cindy kept her humor and heart despite a life of scrubbing floors and dodging her stepfamily as nonsense. It's about kindness, as she never let bitterness turn her cruel, even when she had every reason to. And it's about inner beauty, because while the glass slippers and glittery gown got her to the ball, it was her wit, grit, and ability to laugh at life's absurdities that won the prince's heart. The humor in this retelling underscores the idea that joy can be a rebellion against hardship, and that sometimes the best way to face a cruel world is with a sarcastic quip and a slice of cake. In the end, Cindy didn't need a fairy godmother to save her. She saved herself by staying true to who she was. The magic was just a bonus, and the prince was just a guy who liked her for it. And that, dear reader, is the real happily ever after.